Good morning everyone, this is Divya Diksha. Today we are going to discuss mechanism of muscle contraction. So mechanism of muscle contraction was explained by sliding filament theory, which was given by Andrew Huxley, Hugh Huxley, Ralph Niedergerke and Jean Hansen. The muscle contraction initiates when the central nervous system of our body sends signal to the motor neuron, and then this signal reaches the muscle cell. Now, how is this happening? This happens through the neuromuscular junction. Here we can see a neuromuscular junction where it is the motor neuron, and the motor neuron, the terminal of the motor neuron, the nerve end has synaptic vesicles. Now, these synaptic vesicles contain neurotransmitters. Now, these neurotransmitters, that is acetylcholine, is released into the synaptic cleft in the neuromuscular junction. Now, this synaptic cleft, that is the middle part of the nerve end and the sarcolemma. Sarcolemma is the plasma membrane of the muscle cell. Now, this acetylcholine is released into the synaptic cleft and it is received by the sarcolemma, and thereby the nerve impulse is generated into the sarcolemma. Now, here we see action potential in the sarcolemma. Now, this action potential that is in sarcolemma is now transferred to the T tubules. T tubules are basically membranous extensions in the muscle cell. Now, these membranous extensions penetrates the cell and it stimulates the sarcoplasmic reticulum, that is the endoplasmic reticulum of the muscle cell, to release calcium 2 plus. These calcium 2 plus are sequestered in the sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscle cell. Now, these calcium 2 plus, as it is released in the sarcoplasm, that is the cytoplasm of the muscle cell, the concentration of calcium 2 plus increases. As the concentration of calcium 2 plus increases, we see there is a bridge formation, cross bridge formation between the thick filament and the thin filament. Now, to understand the basic mechanism, what we need to understand is what is thick filament and what is thin filament, what are its components, how does it work. So, this is the thick filament. It is basically tadpole shape, and here is the heavy meromyosin. It has a monomeric unit that is called meromyosin. Now, this meromyosin has two parts. First is the heavy meromyosin and the second one is light meromyosin. Light meromyosin is basically forms the body, and the heavy meromyosin forms the head part of the meromyosin or the myosin filament. This head, myosin head, contains two binding sites. First is the active ATPase enzyme and the second one is the site to bind with the actin filament. Now comes the thin filament. This thin filament consists of different types of protein. First is the globular protein. These globular proteins are in the form of globules, and now these globules joins together and forms a filamentous actin, that is F-actin. Here we can see the globular actin which is in a globule form, and this globule form is making a filament, and this filament is running helically, and this is forming a helical filaments. Now, this is our thin filament. Now, along this G-actin and F-actin, that is filamentous actin, another protein, that is a fibrous protein. This fibrous protein also runs. This fibrous protein is called tropomyosin. Now, this tropomyosin and troponin 2 makes a complex and runs along the filamentous actin. This troponin and tropomyosin complex has two parts. First is the troponin and the second one is tropomyosin. Tropomyosin is the fibrous part and it also runs in this way. Now comes the troponin. Troponin is a trimeric protein and it has three units. Troponin I, troponin G, troponin C. Troponin C part binds with the calcium 2 plus ions, and it is the binding site for the calcium, and troponin T binds to the tropomyosin, and troponin I is an inhibitory subunit which inhibits the interaction between actin and the myosin filament. Now we understand what is thick and the thin filament, and now we will be understanding how is this process, that mechanism of contraction happens. So first, what happens is we have discussed till the calcium 2 plus ion increases in the sarcoplasm. As the calcium 2 plus ion increases in the sarcoplasm, here we can see a actin filament. This actin filament is having a myosin binding site. This one is myosin binding site. Now this myosin binding site is in a relaxed state binding to the troponin tropomyosin complex. Here this one is troponin and this one is tropomyosin. Now this is the complex which is attaching to the myosin binding site, that is on the actin filament. Now what happens is when the calcium 2 plus ion is increased, what happens? The masking is finished, that is the unmasking of the myosin binding site on the actin filament occurs, and the troponin and tropomyosin complex moves away from the myosin binding site, and now is the myosin binding site on the actin filament is free to be bind to the myosin head. Okay, now here we can see a myosin filament, this myosin filament, and this is the actin filament. Now actin and myosin is going to bind and form a cross bridge. How is it going to happen? Firstly, we have understood how the calcium ion is increasing and the myosin binding site is getting unmasked. Now what happens is the ATP hydrolysis occurs and the ATP breakdown occurs. Utilizing the energy, the myosin binds to the actin filament and forms cross bridge. Now after the formation of the cross bridge, what happens is that the myosin pulls inward the actin filament, and the sarcomere, which is bounded by two Z lines is pulled inward towards the M line, which is the center of the sarcomere. This way the myosin pulls inward the actin filament, that is the thin filament, as a result of which the contraction occurs. Okay, after the muscle contraction occurs, what happens is that ADP and PI are released, and as a result of which the cross bridge is broken, and again the ATP is bind to the active ATPase site on the myosin head. After that, conformation changes and cross bridge broken. As the cross bridge is broken, what happens is that again the cycle continues and the contraction and the relaxation of muscle occurs. We must understand and also remember that Z line is pulled inward, A band retains its size, I band shortens, and H zone gets narrower. This is the result of the muscle contraction. These are asked many times in the examination. So this was the whole muscle contraction mechanism that I have explained. That's all for today. Thank you.